It's a real honour today to have Caroline Wilson, one of Australia's preeminent sports journalists, in particular of Australian rules football, joining us. She's been writing about the game since 1982. In that time, she's won a host of awards, multiple Walkley Awards, Australian Sports Commission Lifetime Achievement, and also the Graham Perkins Australian Journalist of the Year. Caroline, it's a real pleasure to have you. Thanks for giving up a little bit of time today to talk to us.
Thanks, Tristan. Thanks, Josh.
No worries. Now I'm going to hand over to these boys. They're going to fire you some questions, and we'll just go from there.
Okay, fire away.
So hey Caroline, so thanks for being here again. So firstly, you were brought up in and around the Richmond Football Club, but what really motivated you to become a sports journalist?
Look, I wish I could say it was something I'd always wanted to do, boys, but I always wanted to be a journalist, probably from about the start of senior school, high school. My interest, to be honest, was in film production, script writing, even being a film critic. That was what really drove me into journalism, and I also really enjoyed English and humanities at school. And it was only in my third and final year of my cadetship at the old Melbourne Herald, the afternoon paper, that it just seemed to me that there was one department that seemed to be having a lot more fun than any of the others, and that was the sports department. And Mike Sheehan was the chief football writer. He'd just come over from the Age as a big hiring. He was a bit of a shining light for me, and people just encouraged me, including Corrie Perkin, a very good and close friend who I'd met at RMIT journalism, who had done a year covering sport for the Age, and she said, "Give it a go, you'd love it." So I gave it a go.
Great, thanks for the answer. So the second question is, I think it is fair to say that you've been a pioneer for females in the sports journalism in this country. When you look at the amount of women in various roles within sport, are you proud of the role you played in that? And do you think there is still some way to go in the wider football industry?
Look, yes to both of those. I think it's only as I've got older that I've probably realised, I hope that I did make a bit of an impact for other young women who came into the game. It never occurred to me. It sounds weird. When I started out, I didn't really feel that I was one out, although looking back I was. To be honest, I loved being the only female. It gave me a lot of opportunities I wouldn't have normally had. It certainly meant that if I did a good story, my success was probably amplified, because people were so shocked that a woman could go to a footy game and actually understand it and write about it. Naturally, of course, everybody knows that women have just as much right and understanding of the game as anyone else. It does make me proud and I remember being in my later 20s, having been in the game for a few years, living overseas, working in the UK. There were a lot more women covering sport over there, but I was still a bit of a novelty. And it makes me really proud now when I look at Fox Footy and all the women who work there, although there is still not enough. I love the fact that AFLW has had such a cultural impact on the game, quite apart from all the other impacts it's had. And I still think, though, that football clubs have a long way to go, and even more so the AFL, in their cultural sort of attitudes to women. I don't think it's good enough, and I think it's pretty telling at the moment that so many of the people who've lost their jobs, even if temporarily, during the COVID-19 pandemic, a lot of those have been women, and they've been seen as sort of superfluous to requirements, which has been really disappointing.
Yeah. It's a good point. Yeah.
Well, that was truly inspirational. But so another question I think one of the fair few reasons why you're so respected in the Australian media is your ability to ask difficult questions and also embrace the professional conflict that stems from them. Were you always comfortable asking those questions, or was that something you had to develop as you progressed through the industry?
I'm still not comfortable asking difficult questions. If someone says they are, then I don't think you can be human and not feel intimidated or a bit nervous. I always say that if a story or a question doesn't make you feel a bit sick, then it's not really worth asking. Now, not every single question has to be a difficult question, but there is no point doing a story or a report or having an opinion if everybody thinks exactly the same thing, or if you're telling people something they already know. And the only stories really that count, in my view, are the ones they don't want you to write. So it is so difficult still making a phone call or confronting someone if you're asking a coach whether he thinks his job might be on the line, whether he owes an apology to a player he's mistreated, to a player about a bad game or an act of disloyalty to their club. But you've got to ask them. And no, I think something inside me tells me I just have to do it because it's a waste of time if I don't. But I certainly don't ever feel comfortable.
Yeah. Thank you. So the nature of how sport is being covered in the media seems to be changing rapidly. The AFL itself and most clubs now have their own news services, and also social media creates a direct platform between players and fans. The role of independent sports journalism, at least from the outside view, seems to be under pressure. Why is it such an integral part of the sporting product?
Because we have to hold people to account. We have to, my main beef is Australian rules football, and the AFL, most people would agree, is probably one of the best sporting organisations in the country, but it's got a long way to go and it makes mistakes. And we have to challenge them. The West Coast Eagles are the most powerful sporting club, wealthiest sporting club maybe in the country, but they're not perfect, as we've seen over the decades. We have to hold them to account. We have to challenge them. When I started out, when you made a phone call to a football club, you rang either the footy manager, the team manager, or the coach, or the president, or the general manager, who's now called the CEO, or a player. And so you were able to find out what was really going on. I hate the way we have these barriers now into clubs. I understand that they need to send out their messages, and I understand they're trying to control the message, but I tell all my younger colleagues, don't see these people as your friends. They might become your friends, and some of them are really good people, and some of them are happy to brief you, background you, tell you how it is. But in the end, the only way you're going to find out what's really going on is by ringing the coach or the president or the CEO or a player, because they're the ones who know what's really going on. And sometimes, if you can make them realise that their information is going to be important to revealing the truth, it's going to be a much better story. So, yes, it's changed. I think it's changed too much. AFL media does have some independent writing, but they're always going to be Pravda, in my view. They're always going to be controlled by the AFL. So, and I think at the moment, when stories are harder and harder to find, as we speak in the middle of the COVID pandemic, I think independent journalism is even more important.
That's a great answer.
Okay, hi Carol, it's now Josh speaking. It's been some really
Hi,
insightful.
Josh.
Hi. It's been some really insightful answers to those questions, especially on print journalism. But just moving away from print journalism into sports broadcasting, I just want to ask you about the influence of television on the way the game is played. The NBA is probably the biggest professional sporting league to openly say entertainment is behind rule changes, including the introduction of the three-point line many years back. In Aussie rules, it seems like our most recent rule changes have been put in due to entertainment as a priority. Do you see this as a good thing, and what will the game resemble in 10 years' time?
Oh, look, what the game will resemble in 10 years' time is one of the great unknowns. But I don't think there's anything wrong with focusing on entertainment. I mean, you might call it entertainment, Josh, but I call it higher scoring and kicking more goals. And there are so many coaches now, and they've got so clever, and they've done so well in working out how to shut down games that they've created some really boring games. And I don't think, as long as you balance integrity with entertainment, I don't think that is a bad thing at all. I don't mind looking at shorter quarters. I don't mind looking at ways to open up the game. I personally think that less interchange rotations in the end are the only thing that is going to continue to open up the game. And I think that it is incumbent upon my sport to keep talking to Channel 7 and Fox Footy and maybe one day Google and Amazon and whoever's televising them, and trying to work out ways that they can be more interesting. And I think the players and the Players Association are really open to that as well. But you've just got to remember that integrity is number one. And if you have integrity, and you have a competition that is ridgy-dig, then the entertainment will come. We do have one of the great world products, which the current AFL really lucked onto. I mean, they inherited it, and I don't think there's too much wrong with it.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. Just with podcasts and live streaming, they're changing our daily viewing habits away from the traditional modes of network television and radio. You know, we could be using a crystal ball to view the AFL in 20 years' time. So do you think we'll be watching sport on services like Facebook or Netflix, or even directly from the AFL in the future?
Look, I think all of those things are possible. I think as we sit here today, the AFL is in the middle of a negotiation that might end up involving some of those different platforms. I don't think anyone's worked out yet how to make money out of Google and Amazon and all those other outlets in terms of monetising the sports. And I think they're keen to do a deal pretty quickly, so they might, or they're probably less likely to come into it. But yes, in the future, absolutely, certainly, and I don't have a huge problem with that. I just say again, I think that in the end, it comes down to a great game, a great contest, and our contest, I think, is always going to be better live at the event. And we visit games in such huge numbers in Australian rules football that is always going to be a massive beacon, even though obviously the broadcast rights are worth a lot more than the game takings. But they make for a better spectacle that so many people go to the game. And in terms of podcasts and other forms of, I suppose, various live streaming and talk shows, etc., I still think that the best commentators and the best journalists are going to carry the day. And I don't think it really matters whether they're doing it through Facebook or a podcast or on a show like AFL 360 or Footy Classified.
Yeah. Okay, thanks for that. Just a few quick fire questions to finish. What would you say was the biggest controversy you have covered in the game?
The Essendon drug scandal, probably by a fair way, only because it lasted so long and the bloodshed was so complete and the massive names that were lost to the game and still struggling to come back to the game. Essendon hasn't really recovered from it even now, and the story was exposed in early 2013, so that's 7 years ago. There were so many elements to that story. It was an international story, and I certainly have never had such personal pushback and antagonism from a story that I've covered.
Yeah, for sure. Who's the best player you've ever seen?
Well, conversely, probably James Hurd. I'm not an Essendon supporter. My husband is, but I don't. He was poetic the way he played, and he could do things. It was incredibly tough, but it looked like it was easy for him. He invented a new way of playing midfield. He was a brilliant forward, and he sort of had an almost artistic sort of element to the way he played the game. I loved watching James Hurd play.
Yeah, for sure.
But Dusty Martin's gaining on him, I've got to say. He's narrowing the gap.
Yeah, definitely. Also, do you know the best game you've ever covered?
Oh, look, it's been in the news a lot lately, but there are two. The 1994 preliminary final between Geelong and North Melbourne, the game where both Ablett and Carey starred. But I think in terms of the stakes, the result and the individual moments and what happened behind the scenes, the 1989 grand final where Geelong beat Hawthorn by a kick.
Yeah.
Okay. Just like that, yeah.
Now, Caroline, you probably have never answered this question in your life, but we've asked every guest on the podcast this. Here at Hale on Tuesdays is Meat Pie Day, where all the boarders and staff get meat pies, and some of the stuff the boarders and our country kids do with meat pies, they take the roof off and eat it with a spoon and just stuff that you wouldn't recommend. But we've asked everyone, so I'll ask you as well. How does Caroline Wilson eat a meat pie?
Well, it depends where I am. If I'm at the footy, I just take bites out of it with a bit of tomato sauce. But if I'm at home, I would never take the roof off. One of my children does that. I think that ruins it. You've got to eat it bit by bit with a knife and fork and some, dare I say, hot English mustard.
Oh, I love the versatility. Caroline, thanks for joining us. Really appreciate it. Really insightful answers to the game and the industry that we're all following, and hopefully we can get back as soon as possible.
Go Hale. Thanks, boys.
Thanks, Caroline.
Thanks, Caroline.